Hi there, I'm Michael Fudge, and in this video I will demonstrate an end-to-end coding example. In the end-to-end series, we'll solve a real-world problem by writing code. I will demonstrate how to approach the problem, devise a plan, and then execute that plan by writing Python code. It is designed to give you a complete picture of how to take an informational problem and then code up a working technological solution to that problem. In this end-to-end example, it's the first in the series, which starts at lesson 3. In this unit, we learned about inputs and outputs, variables, and Python data types. We'll need all this stuff to complete the problem from idea to solution. It should be noted that in this example, like all the end-to-end examples, I'm going to write the program organically. I'm going to make mistakes, I'm going to learn from them, I'm going to write the program several times, making constant revisions and continuing to program until I get to something of a solution, just like it would happen in real life. I do very little editing in this video, and this is by design. I want you to experience how this happens for real. This end-to-end example will be in Jupyter-Notebook. I already have that up on my screen. You're welcome to code along with me, but the completed source code and example are on GitHub already. Here's the URL. If you're a student taking my course, you have this code already because you've cloned the GitHub repository. All right, let's get started. So in this particular example, we need to write a program that asks for inputs of hourly rate and hours works, and then outputs total pay. Then we should input a tax rate and output the net pay. So that's kind of a lot to do at once, so I'm going to break this up into two parts. I'm going to first write the program that inputs hourly rate and hours worked, and then outputs total pay. So I'm going to think this through. So I need to enter hours worked. For example, maybe you work 20 hours. Then I need to enter the hourly rate. For example, maybe you make $15 an hour. Well, let's make it $15.50 just to make it interesting. And then I want to print out the total pay, which this should be a function of hours worked multiplied by the hourly rate. For example, in this case, it would be 20 times 15.50, which I don't know what that is off the top of my head, but I'm sure I could do the math and figure it out. The point is, when you write a program, you don't want to focus on the specific values like this. You want to focus on the generic values as they are in variable names. That way you can solve any problem. You can solve the same problem when you work 15 hours and make $30 an hour. Get it? But to make sure your program works, you need to have specific values so that you can check the math or check the logic and make sure that it's going to solve the problem the way it should. All right, so maybe I should simplify my problem and not pick $15.50 and pick something like $5 an hour, because I can do that math in my head. So in this case, 20 times 5, that should be $100 in total pay. All right, I'm going to code these up. I have 3 lines in my to-do list, so this should translate roughly into 3 lines of code. It's generally how you want to approach solving a problem, one step for each code line. So the first line, enter hours work. So I need to use the input statement to get input from the user. Something like that. And I'm just going to run that. Enter number of hours worked. I work 10 hours. Okay. Now this statement here is pretty useless unless we store the output of this input statement into a variable. So whenever you have an input statement, you're always going to store it in a variable like this. And then just to show you that it's still working, I'm just going to print that variable so we can see what's in it. Okay, enter number of hours worked. I worked 20 hours. And it prints out a 20. So far, so good. Now, the first piece of criticism I would have of myself is X doesn't represent what I'm trying to solve in the problem. I want my variable names to actually make my code like self-explanatory. And X is a horrible name. A better name for this would be hours worked, like this. All right, so let's change that. All right, let's give it another run. You see, I'm not writing the entire program at once and then running it. I'm writing bits of it, because why would I want to write 10 lines of code and then debug 10 lines when I can write just 2 lines, get those working exactly the way I want, then write 2 more? It's a smart way to program. Okay, I'm getting an error here. It says invalid syntax. And this is one of the problems with when you name variables. You can't have spaces in your variable names. Actually, Python thinks this is two variables. So I need to put something between these, like underscore, so that it represents one value for the variable. That's a little better. Enter number of hours worked. I worked 20 hours. There we go, 20. So I'm getting there. So I've, in essence, all I've really done is this first line. And I'm going to put for example here, so I know that I'm not always entering in 20. Let's move on and do the next step right here. Enter hourly rate. This is going to be similar. So I think I could probably write this correctly in one shot. Rate, input, enter hourly rate. All right, and I'm just going to print them both out so I can see that it's working. Okay, under number of hours worked, I worked 20 hours. Oops, I worked 10 hours because I typed that in. And then 5 is the hourly rate. And it prints out the two values, 10 and 5. Now, it doesn't do any math because we didn't tell Python to do any math. So what I need before I print anything is I need to do this. Print total pay hours worked by hourly rate. I actually should make this another step. I should say total pay. I want to assign that to hours worked times hourly rate. Then I want to print the total pay. All right, let's do that. Total pay. Now to take a calculation and assign it to a value, it's the single equals, just like we did here, right? So total pay, hours worked times hourly rate. And then I want to print total pay. All right, let's give it a shot. Enter number of hours worked, 20. Hourly rate, 5. And it says type error, cannot multiply sequence by non-int of type stir. All right, here's what's going on here. Remember, all the variables in Python are of a certain data type. So when you just input, that data type is of type stir. So what I'm doing down here is I have a string, and then these two things get multiplied together. If I want to get clarification on this, I can come down here to this cell, and I can do, what is the type of hours worked? That's of type stir. And likewise, I could do this for hourly rate. And I get stir. So the operator, the asterisk operator, doesn't seem to apply in this example to things of type stir. I actually need to convert these two values to type float. Remember, the data type float looks like this. It's a number with a decimal point. Why do I want floats instead of ints? Because when I multiply, you know, what if I make $5.50 an hour, right? Or what if I work 20 and a half hours a week? There's no guarantee it's always going to be a whole number, so let's just use floats. So if I said float hourly rate and float hours worked, I should get a number that comes back as a float. All right. So how can I take what I've learned down here and fix this up here? Well, there's a couple of ways. The way we're going to do it to start is we're just going to convert, we're going to take the input and we're going to convert that to a float like this. We're going to say take the input, convert it to a float, right? I could also do it here, but I'm going to do it this way. And again, why do I need to do that? Why do I need to do that? Because what I want to input is not just anything. I want to input a number, and I want that number to be converted to a float before it's stored in the variable. That way, when I get down to this step, it can multiply correctly. So let's give it a shot. 25, and it works 100. And just to show you the sanity check here, what if I worked 10 hours and I made 5.75 an hour? That's $57.50. That math works. Okay. So far, so good. Now, if this was a real payroll program, this would be horrible output, because whenever you have output, you wanna be able to label it so that the user knows what the number means. So I should have something in front of total pay like total pay. That way, when the program executes, the user who runs the program knows what that 200 means. It's the same reason why we have this here. If I take this out and remove this and run the program, it asks for input and you don't know what to do here. Right? So the point is you should always have prompts, right, in your code. And these prompts let the person who's executing the code know what they should do when and what the results mean that they get back. It's an important aspect of programming. It also makes your code much more self-documenting, because if I look at this, I know that it's asking me for an hourly rate because that's what this says here, and then it matches up with the intent of the variable, which has hourly rate. If this said lake area, and then this said enter hourly rate, I would be very confused as a programmer looking at this, because the intent doesn't match up with the name of the variable. So we've got things back the way we want. Now, one other trick is you might want to make sure this always formats correctly. I'll give you an example of that. I'm going to run it. I'm going to put in my 20 hours, and I'm going to put in an hourly rate of 5, and it says total pay 100. But you know, when we're talking money, it's always .00, right? It's 2 decimal places. So how can I take this number and print it to 2 decimal places? To do that, I need to use the print format codes, and these are things that we covered this week in the lesson. So if I say percent and then .2f, that says print out a float. This code says print out a float. The percent says there's something special coming. It's called a code, format code. The format code is for float. And this says 2 decimal places, 2 numbers to the right of the decimal point. And now you don't use a comma, you actually pass it in with a percent, like that. Number of hours worked, 20, hourly rate, 5, and now it prints it out the way we'd expect our money to be printed out, with 2 decimal places. If you need precise handling, I'm going to throw a $sign in here just for fun. If you need precise handling of your data, this is the way to do it. Okay. All right, I'm mostly there. I'm almost there. I just have to finish out the other part of it, which is I need to input a tax rate and then output net pay. So I need to input a tax rate. Like, for example, let's just continue on with this. If my total pay is $100, right, then my tax rate, well, let's try it here, right? So $25 an hour. And then let's say our tax rate is 10%. Enter tax rate. For example, 10%. And then what am I going to do with that? I'm going to say net pay. And your net pay is your total pay minus your total pay times the tax rate. There's a couple ways I could do this. I probably should have done it this way. Let's call this, I don't like that. I'm going to call this tax. And it's total pay times tax rate. And then your net pay is going to be total pay minus tax. And then that way I can print tax and print net pay. And then this problem solution is actually going to be better than the initial one that they asked for. And this happens a lot. When you're programming for another person, they may have an idea of what they want, and then you as the implementer get to a point where you realize that you can actually produce something better than what they want and more meaningful. And it's actually not that much more difficult to do so. So it's kind of your responsibility to make sure you do that. All right, these are the lines of code I still need to write. So let's do that. Let's say tax rate, input, enter tax rate. Never talk and type. It's usually a recipe for disaster. Now, I have the same problem I had here that I had before. I want this to be a float, right? So, float input. Okay, let's give it a try. Now, I could run this, right? And just, I could put in, every single time, run it, put in 20, and then put in 5, and now I have to enter a tax rate, right? I could do, and then I run it, and then I finally get the error. I have to run and put those inputs every time because my program demands it, right? But I know this code works, and I want to kind of like streamline the running of it because this half works. So I'm going to hard code these in. This is a little trick that I like to do. So I'm going to make that 20, and then I'm going to put a comment there to comment out the rest of this. Now, when I actually want the whole thing to work, I'll erase this. But for the sake of making this go quickly, right? Now it says total pay is 100, enter tax rate. See, I'm skipping these steps here because I know they work. And I could just ignore them and use constant values till I get this worked out. Then I'll just let it all go and go for the home run, right? Now, it doesn't like the 10% because Python's not smart enough to know how to convert that to a float. So I'm going to have to give somebody some instructions like enter tax rate. For example, 10% is 0.01. All right. And that should give my end user some better instructions for how they should work with my program. Enter tax rate, for example, 10% is 0.1. So now I can put a tax rate of 15%. All right, and that seems to work. All right. Continuing on, let's calculate the tax. So tax is going to be the tax rate times the total pay. Then let's print it out. Print tax. And I'm going to use the same format code I used before because I know it works. All right, let's see how that does. Total pay is 100. Enter tax rate, for example, let's do 15%. That gives me a tax of $15. So far, it looks right to me. The math is working out. Let's finish the program now. So net pay, that's going to be the tax. No, it's the, what did I say it was? Total pay minus tax. Total pay minus tax. Then let's print total pay and then net pay. Now let's see what we got now. Now I'm not 100% confident it's right, but once I get it all working, I'll unleash the gates and go back and put this the way it was. Enter tax rate. Let's do 10%. And it says tax is 10%. Total pay is, ooh, that doesn't look right. What did I do wrong here? Because it should say, this code shouldn't be here. It should have 90 there with 2 decimal places. All right, let's see what I did here. Oh, yeah. See, when you have a code like this, you don't use the comma here. You use the percent symbol. This tells you to put this value and replace it here. Right. 15%. So tax is $15. Total pay, $85. Really cool. I think I got this whole thing working. Let's go for the home run now. Put it back the way it was. So now we're going to try it all. And just to kind of make this all work a little better, I'm going to take my to-do list. I'm going to cut that. And I'm just going to paste it down here for now. Get it out of my way. Then I'm going to run my program. So it says enter number of hours worked. So I'm going to put in I worked 100 hours. I make $15 an hour. I got paid $1,500. Let's say that's a 20% tax rate. That's $300 in tax. and my total pay is $1,200. Looks like everything is working out the way I want it to. So there's one more thing I would probably add to this program before I would call it done. Before you ask people for inputs, you should probably explain what you're going to do, what your program does. So I'll do something simple like this. Print. This program will calculate your total pay, tax, and net pay. There's so much code here. I probably want to turn some line numbers on. So I'm going to hit escape to go into command mode. I'm going to hit L. So now I've got my 10 lines of code that I can see. And I'm going to give it a run. This program will calculate your total pay, tax, and net pay. Enter your total number of hours worked. I worked 10 hours. I make $7.50 an hour. Enter my tax rate. Let's say it's 10%. Tax $7.50. Net pay $67.50. Total pay $7,500. Looks right. One thing this program doesn't do is it doesn't handle bad inputs. Like I could put in number of hours of work, 5, and it just blows up because it can't convert string to float. You get this error message here. Right now, this is not your fault. Later on in Python, we'll learn how to deal with this. This concludes our end-to-end example. Hopefully you found this useful. See you for the next one. Bye.